Aria Harris was told she was being dramatic. For 18 months, doctors dismissed her crushing headaches as stress, her dizzy spells as anxiety, and her vision problems as nothing more than eye strain from too much screen time. "You're 28 and healthy," they said. "Just walk it off." But when the MRI results finally came back, the same doctors who had been telling her it was all in her head suddenly went silent. What they saw on that scan would change everything and prove that sometimes the patient knows their body better than anyone else. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first headache hit Aria Harris on a Tuesday morning in March 2023, right in the middle of her daily jog through Riverside Park in Columbus, Ohio. She'd been running the same 3-mile loop for years, but that morning, a sharp pain sliced through the left side of her skull like someone had driven an ice pick behind her eye. She stumbled, caught herself against a lamppost, and waited for it to pass. "Probably dehydrated," she muttered, walking the rest of the way home to her apartment on High Street. By Thursday, the headaches were coming daily. By the following week, they were accompanied by a strange floating sensation that made her feel like she was walking on a boat in choppy waters. Aria had always been practical about her health. She ate well, exercised regularly, and hadn't missed a day of work at Morrison & Associates Marketing in over 2 years. But these symptoms were different from anything she'd experienced. Her first stop was Dr. Patricia Kellerman, her primary care physician at Columbus Family Health. Dr. Kellerman had been treating Aria since she'd moved to Ohio 5 years earlier, and she'd always been thorough and attentive. This time felt different. "Stress headaches are incredibly common in women your age," Dr. Kellerman explained, barely looking up from her computer screen as she typed. "You mentioned you got a promotion recently?" "3 months ago, but I love my job. I don't think—" "New responsibilities can create tension you don't even realize you're carrying. I'm going to prescribe a muscle relaxer and recommend you try some meditation apps. Cut back on caffeine, get more sleep, and these should resolve on their own." Aria left the appointment with a prescription bottle and a nagging feeling that she hadn't been heard. The muscle relaxers made her drowsy but did nothing for the headaches. If anything, they were getting worse. 2 weeks later, she was back in Dr. Kellerman's office, this time with a new symptom that terrified her. "My vision keeps going blurry," she explained, gripping the edges of the examination chair. "Yesterday, I was driving to work and suddenly I couldn't read the street signs clearly. I had to pull over until it passed." Dr. Kellerman performed a basic eye exam, checking Aria's pupils with a small flashlight. "Your pupils are responding normally. When's the last time you had your eyes checked?" "About a year ago. My optometrist said everything was perfect." "Well, sometimes our vision changes more rapidly than we expect. I'm going to refer you to Dr. Martinez, an ophthalmologist, but I suspect this is related to the same stress that's causing your headaches. Are you sleeping well?" Aria wanted to scream. "I was sleeping fine until these headaches started waking me up at 3 in the morning." "Let's try a different approach then." Dr. Kellerman turned back to her computer. "I'm prescribing a low-dose antidepressant. It's commonly used for chronic headaches, and it might help with the sleep issues too." The ophthalmologist appointment was 3 weeks away. In the meantime, Aria's symptoms multiplied. The floating sensation became so severe that she had to hold onto walls when walking down the hallway at work. Her colleagues started noticing. "You okay, Aria?" asked Jake Sullivan, her project manager, after watching her steady herself against a conference room doorframe during a client presentation. "You look a little pale." "Just tired," she lied, not wanting to admit that she'd nearly lost her balance while standing perfectly still. The blurry vision episodes were happening more frequently, too. Sometimes, text on her computer screen would suddenly swim out of focus, forcing her to close her eyes and wait for it to clear. Other times, she'd look at someone speaking to her, and their face would seem to shimmer at the edges, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Dr. Martinez, the ophthalmologist, was kind but equally dismissive. After a comprehensive eye exam, he found nothing wrong with her vision. "Your eyes are healthy," he assured her. "Sometimes stress can manifest in visual disturbances. Are you under any unusual pressure at work or in your personal life? Everyone keeps asking me about stress, Arya said, frustration creeping into her voice. But I've been stressed before, and it never felt like this. Stress affects everyone differently. I'd recommend following up with your primary care physician about stress management techniques. By June, Arya felt like she was living in a fog. The headaches were now constant companions, ranging from a dull throb that made it hard to concentrate to sharp stabbing pains that left her nauseated and seeing spots. She'd started keeping a detailed symptom journal on her phone, noting the time, intensity, and duration of each episode. Her family was beginning to worry. During their weekly video call, her mother, Linda Harris, noticed Arya squinting and rubbing her temples. "Honey, you don't look well. Have you seen a doctor?" "I've seen 3 doctors, Mom. They all say it's stress." "Maybe you should get a second opinion or see a specialist." "I saw an eye doctor. I'm seeing a neurologist next month, but the wait list was forever." Her father, Robert Harris, leaned into the camera frame. "In my day, doctors didn't give up so easily. Maybe you need to be more assertive." Arya almost laughed. She'd been nothing but assertive, documenting every symptom, asking pointed questions, even researching her symptoms online, though that had only led her down rabbit holes of terrifying possibilities that the doctors assured her were extremely unlikely in someone her age. The worst episode came on a Saturday morning in July. Arya woke up with a headache so severe she couldn't lift her head from the pillow without vomiting. The room spun violently every time she tried to sit up, and her vision was so blurry she couldn't make out the numbers on her alarm clock. She managed to call her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had a spare key. "I need to go to the emergency room," Arya whispered when Mrs. Chen found her curled up on the bathroom floor. At Riverside Methodist Hospital, the emergency room doctor was Dr. Kevin Walsh, a tired-looking man in his 50s who seemed annoyed to be dealing with what he clearly considered a non-emergency. "Young woman with headaches," he muttered to the nurse. "Classic anxiety presentation." Despite Arya's protests, Dr. Walsh ordered only basic blood work and gave her a stronger pain medication. "Your blood work is normal. I'm going to discharge you with instructions to follow up with your primary care physician. Sometimes anxiety can create very real physical symptoms." "This isn't anxiety," Arya said weakly. "Something is wrong with me." "I understand you're concerned, but we need to rule out the common things first. Anxiety and stress are much more likely culprits than anything serious in someone your age." Arya left the hospital feeling more alone than ever. Even in the emergency room, with symptoms that had left her unable to function, she was being told it was all in her head. The neurology appointment finally arrived in August. Dr. Sarah Thompson at Columbus Neurological Associates was different from the other doctors. She listened carefully as Arya described her symptoms and took detailed notes. "I want to order an MRI," Dr. Thompson said after completing her examination. "Your symptoms could be consistent with several conditions, and I think we need a clearer picture of what's happening." For the first time in months, Arya felt hopeful. "Do you think something might actually be wrong?" "I think we need more information," Dr. Thompson said carefully. "The MRI will help us rule out any structural causes for your symptoms." The MRI was scheduled for September 15th, nearly 6 months after Arya's symptoms had begun. As she lay in the loud, claustrophobic machine, she found herself both hoping they'd find something and terrified of what that something might be. 3 days later, Dr. Thompson's office called. "Dr. Thompson would like to see you in person to discuss your results. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" "Can't you just tell me over the phone if everything's normal?" There was a pause. Dr. Thompson prefers to discuss results in person. Arya's stomach dropped. In her experience, doctors only insisted on in-person appointments when they had something serious to discuss. Dr. Thompson's office felt different when Arya walked in the next morning. The usual bustling energy was replaced by a hushed tension that made her palms sweat. The receptionist, who had always been chatty during previous visits, barely made eye contact as she checked Arya in. "Dr. Thompson will see you shortly," she said quietly, gesturing toward the familiar waiting area. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Arya chose a seat facing the hallway, watching as other patients came and went. A middle-aged man walked out looking relieved, chatting casually with his wife about dinner plans. An elderly woman emerged from another room, laughing with the nurse about her grandchildren. Normal interactions. Normal results. Arya Harris? Dr. Thompson stood in her doorway, but something was off about her usual professional demeanor. Her shoulders seemed tense, and she wasn't wearing her typical welcoming smile. The walk down the hallway felt endless. Inside the consultation room, Dr. Thompson closed the door, something she'd never done during previous appointments, and sat down across from Arya with a manila folder in her hands. "I'm going to be direct with you," Dr. Thompson began, her voice steady but serious. The MRI revealed something unexpected. Arya's heart began pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Okay." "There's a mass in your brain. It's located in the left temporal lobe, which explains the headaches, vision disturbances, and balance issues you've been experiencing." The words hit Arya like physical blows. Mass? Brain? The room suddenly felt impossibly small, and she gripped the arms of her chair to keep herself steady. "When you say mass?" "It appears to be a tumor. It's approximately 3.2 centimeters, which is significant, but not massive. However, its location is causing compression on surrounding brain tissue, which is responsible for your symptoms." Arya stared at Dr. Thompson, trying to process what she was hearing. 6 months of being told nothing was wrong, of being dismissed and medicated for anxiety, and now this. How long has it been there? Based on your symptom timeline and the size, I'd estimate it's been growing for at least a year, possibly longer. Brain tumors can develop slowly, and symptoms often don't appear until they reach a certain size or position. "But everyone said I was fine. Dr. Kellerman, the ER doctor, the eye doctor, they all said it was stress." Dr. Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Unfortunately, brain tumors in young adults are relatively rare, which means they're not always the first thing doctors consider. Your symptoms could have been attributed to many different conditions." "Could it have been? I told them exactly what was happening. I kept a journal. I documented everything." "I know, and I'm sorry you went through that, but we need to focus on moving forward now." Arya felt a surge of anger cutting through her shock. Moving forward? I've lost 6 months. 6 months of this thing growing in my brain while doctors told me to meditate and take antidepressants? I understand your frustration. Do you? Because I don't think anyone understands what it's like to know something is seriously wrong with your body and have everyone treat you like you're being hysterical. Dr. Thompson set down the folder and leaned forward. "You're right, I can't fully understand what you've been through, but I can tell you that we caught this, and now we can treat it." The word treat snapped Arya back to the present reality. What kind of treatment are we talking about? "I'm referring to you Dr. Michael Rodriguez at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center. He's one of the best neurosurgeons in the region, and he specializes in temporal lobe tumors. You'll need surgery to remove it." "Surgery on my brain?" "Yes, the good news is that the tumor appears to be well-defined, which suggests it may be benign. We won't know for certain until after it's removed and biopsied, but the imaging characteristics are encouraging." Arya tried to focus on the word benign, but her mind kept circling back to surgery on my brain. 3 days ago, she'd been worried about a work deadline. Now she was facing brain surgery. What happens if I don't have the surgery? The tumor will continue to grow. Your symptoms will worsen, and eventually it could become life-threatening. The longer we wait, the more complex the surgery becomes. Dr. Thompson handed her a business card and several printed pages. "Dr. Rodriguez's office will call you today to schedule a consultation. I've already sent over your MRI results and medical history." Arya looked down at the papers in her hands without really seeing them. How do I tell my family, my job? One step at a time. The most important thing right now is meeting with Dr. Rodriguez and getting a surgical plan in place. The drive home from Dr. Thompson's office was a blur.
Arya found herself taking random turns, not ready to face her empty apartment with this news. She ended up in the parking lot of a coffee shop she'd never been to, sitting in her car and staring at her phone. She called her mother first. "Arya, how did the doctor's appointment go? Did you finally get some answers?" "Mom, I need you to sit down." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, "Oh God, what is it?" "I have a brain tumor. They found it on the MRI." She heard her mother gasp, then the sound of her father's voice in the background asking what was wrong. "How big? Is it cancer?" "They don't know yet. It's about 3 centimeters, and I need surgery to remove it. They think it might be benign." "We're coming up there," her father said, having taken the phone from her mother. "We'll be there tonight." "Dad, you don't have to." "We're coming. End of discussion." After hanging up, Arya sat in the coffee shop parking lot for another hour, watching people walk in and out with their normal problems and normal lives. A college student stressed about an exam, a businessman arguing about a delayed shipment, a mother trying to console a crying toddler. She thought about all the times over the past 6 months when she'd questioned herself, all the nights she'd lain awake wondering if she was somehow imagining her symptoms or exaggerating them. All the appointments where she'd left feeling like she was being dramatic or seeking attention. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake at work. "Hope you're feeling better. Don't worry about the Henderson project. We've got it covered." Jake had no idea that his casual concern about her missing work was about to become the least of anyone's worries.
By the time she got home, Arya felt emotionally drained but strangely relieved. Having an answer, even a terrifying one, was better than the months of uncertainty and dismissal she'd endured. Her apartment looked the same, but everything felt different. The stack of self-help books about stress management that she'd bought in desperation sat on her coffee table, mocking her now. The meditation app she'd downloaded was still on her phone's home screen. All the things she'd been told would fix her anxiety-induced symptoms. Dr. Rodriguez's office called within 2 hours, just as Dr. Thompson had promised. "We have an opening tomorrow at 2 p.m., the scheduler said. "Dr. Rodriguez reviewed your MRI and would like to see you as soon as possible." That fast? Dr. Rodriguez prefers not to delay when it comes to temporal lobe masses, especially ones that are symptomatic. Tomorrow? Less than 24 hours to wrap her head around having a brain tumor before meeting with the surgeon who would be cutting into her skull. Her parents arrived that evening, looking older and more worried than she'd seen them in years. Her mother hugged her for a full minute without speaking, while her father paced around her living room like a caged animal. "I've been doing research," her father announced, pulling out his iPad. "Ohio State has an excellent reputation for neurosurgery. Dr. Rodriguez has published dozens of papers on brain tumor removal." "Dad, please don't make yourself Google this stuff." "I'm not crazy. I'm prepared. We need to know what questions to ask tomorrow." Her mother finally spoke up. "How are you handling this, sweetheart? Really?" Arya considered lying, telling them she was fine and handling it well, but she was exhausted from pretending everything was okay. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I'm also angry. Really, really angry." At the tumor? To everyone who told me nothing was wrong. At the doctors who made me feel like I was being hysterical. I sometimes believe them. Her father stopped pacing. "You have nothing to be angry at yourself about. You knew something was wrong, and you kept fighting for answers. That's exactly what you should have done." "But what if I hadn't kept pushing? What if I just accepted that it was stressful and stopped going to doctors?" "But you didn't," her mother said firmly. "You trusted your instincts, and that's probably what saved your life." That night, Arya lay awake thinking about the past 6 months differently. Instead of focusing on the dismissals and delays, she thought about her own persistence. Despite being told repeatedly that nothing was wrong, she'd continued seeking answers. She documented her symptoms, pushed for specialist referrals, and refused to accept stress as an explanation for debilitating neurological symptoms. Maybe her father was right. Maybe her persistence had saved her life. The Ohio State Wexner Medical Center felt like a different universe from the small family practice offices Arya had grown accustomed to.
The neurosurgery wing buzzed with purposeful activity, nurses moving quickly between rooms, residents carrying thick patient files, and families gathered in hushed conversations that carried the weight of life-altering decisions. Dr. Michael Rodriguez was younger than Arya had expected, probably in his early 40s, with graying temples and an intensity that was immediately apparent. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I've reviewed your MRI extensively," he said, pulling up the images on a large monitor. "What I'm seeing is consistent with a meningioma, a tumor that develops from the protective layers around your brain." Arya stared at the black and white images on the screen. There it was, the thing that had been terrorizing her for months, looking almost innocuous as a bright white mass against the gray tissue of her brain. The location is what we call an eloquent brain, areas that control critical functions like speech, memory, and motor skills. That's why you've been experiencing the symptoms you have. Her father leaned forward. "Is it cancer?" Meningiomas are typically benign, which means they don't spread to other parts of the body. However, benign doesn't mean harmless. This tumor is compressing healthy brain tissue and will continue to grow if left untreated. "How long do I have?" I asked, the question sounding surreal as it left her mouth. "It's not about time in the way you're thinking," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "This isn't a death sentence, but delaying surgery significantly increases the risk of permanent neurological damage. The brain tissue being compressed can only handle so much pressure before it stops functioning properly." Her mother spoke up from her corner chair. "What does the surgery involve exactly?" Dr. Rodriguez turned to a model of a human brain on his desk. "We'll perform what's called a craniotomy. I'll make an incision along your hairline, remove a section of skull to access the tumor, then carefully separate it from the surrounding brain tissue. The goal is complete removal while preserving all normal brain function." While I'm awake? Arya had read about awake brain surgery online, and the thought terrified her. "No, you'll be under general anesthesia for the entire procedure. Awake craniotomies are typically reserved for tumors in areas that control speech or fine motor skills. Your tumor's location allows us to work while you're completely unconscious." The relief was immediate, though short-lived as Dr. Rodriguez continued. "The surgery will take approximately 4 to 6 hours. We'll have continuous monitoring of your brain activity throughout the procedure, and I'll have a team of specialists assisting." "What are the risks?" her father asked, his notebook already filled with questions. Dr. Rodriguez's expression became more serious. "As with any brain surgery, there are risks: bleeding, infection, swelling, and potential damage to surrounding brain tissue that could affect speech, memory, or motor function. However, given your age and the tumor's characteristics, I'm optimistic about your outcome." "And if the surgery goes well?" "If we achieve complete removal and there are no complications, you should see significant improvement in your symptoms within weeks. The headaches should resolve, your balance should return to normal, and the vision issues should disappear." Arya tried to imagine waking up without the constant throbbing in her head, without the dizzy spells that had become part of her daily routine. It seemed almost too good to be true. "When would this happen?" "I have an opening next Friday. I know that seems soon, but given your symptom progression, I don't recommend waiting longer." Next Friday? 7 days to prepare for someone to cut open her skull and remove part of her brain. "Is there anything I need to do to prepare?" "Stop taking any blood thinners or anti-inflammatory medications immediately. No ibuprofen, no aspirin. We'll need you to come in Thursday for preoperative testing, blood work, EKG, chest x-ray. And I want you to meet with our neuropsychologist for baseline cognitive testing." The appointment lasted another hour, covering surgical details, recovery expectations, and postoperative care. By the time they left, Arya's head was spinning with medical terminology and timeline logistics. "I need to tell you about work," she said as they walked to the parking garage. Her father shook his head. "Forget work right now. Your only job is getting ready for this surgery." But Arya couldn't forget work. She'd been promoted just months before her symptoms started, and her absence over the past few weeks hadn't gone unnoticed. She needed to have honest conversations with her team about what was coming. The next morning, she called Jake Sullivan and asked to meet privately. "What's going on, Arya? Everyone's been worried about you." They sat in the conference room she'd stumbled in months earlier, and Arya found herself staring at the spot where she'd gripped the doorframe to steady herself. "I have a brain tumor," she said simply. "I'm having surgery next Friday to remove it." Jake's face went through a series of expressions: shock, concern, then immediate problem-solving mode. "Jesus, how long have you known?" "I found out yesterday, but I've been sick for months. Remember all those times you asked if I was okay? I thought you were just stressed about the promotion. So did every doctor I saw until last week." Jake ran his hands through his hair. "What do you need from us? How long will you be out?" "I don't know yet. Recovery could be weeks or months. I wanted to tell you directly before rumors started spreading." "Don't worry about anything here. We'll figure it out. You just focus on getting better." The conversation with her manager, Susan Chen, was more complicated. Susan was understanding but concerned about project timelines and client commitments. "We'll need to redistribute your accounts," Susan said, already mentally reorganizing the team structure. "The Henderson project is due next month." "I know. I can help transition everything to Jake before Friday." "Are you sure you should be working right now?" "I need something normal to focus on." The rest of the week passed in a strange blur of medical appointments and work transitions. The preoperative testing at the hospital felt routine after months of medical visits, but the neuropsychologist appointment was unexpectedly emotional. Dr. Lisa Chain administered a series of cognitive tests, memory exercises, pattern recognition, verbal fluency assessments. Simple tasks that Arya would have sailed through 6 months earlier now required intense concentration. "Are you noticing any cognitive changes?" Dr. Chang asked, as Arya struggled to remember a list of words she'd been given 5 minutes earlier. "My memory isn't as sharp as it used to be, and sometimes I lose words. I'll be talking and suddenly can't remember a common word." That's consistent with pressure on the temporal lobe. The good news is that these symptoms are often reversible once the tumor is removed and the pressure is relieved. Often? Every brain is different, and recovery varies from person to person, but your baseline cognitive function is strong, which is a good prognostic indicator. Thursday night, her parents stayed at her apartment to drive her to the hospital in the morning. They ordered pizza and tried to maintain normal conversation, but tension filled the room like smoke. "I keep thinking about all those doctors who dismissed you," her mother said during dinner. "What if Dr. Thompson hadn't ordered that MRI?" "But she did. That's what matters now." "Still, 6 months of growth that could have been prevented." "Mom, please, I can't think about that right now." Her father changed the subject to safer topics: work projects, family gossip, plans for after her recovery. But Arya found herself thinking about her mother's comment. 6 months of tumor growth while she was told to meditate and reduce stress. That night, she lay in bed writing in the journal she'd kept throughout her symptoms. The entries from March seemed like they were written by a different person, someone who trusted the medical system implicitly, who assumed doctors knew better than she did about her own body. Now, the night before brain surgery, she felt older and more cynical, but also strangely empowered. She'd fought for answers when everyone told her to stop looking. She'd trusted her instincts when medical professionals dismissed them. She'd advocated for herself when no one else would. At 5 a.m., her alarm went off for the last time with a tumor in her brain. In 12 hours, she would either be tumor-free or facing complications that could change her life forever. There was no middle ground, no more waiting, no more uncertainty about what was wrong. For the first time in months, that clarity felt like a gift. The preoperative area at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center was a maze of curtained spaces filled with the quiet sounds of medical preparation. Arya sat on the edge of a hospital bed at 6:30 a.m., wearing a surgical gown and compression socks, while a steady stream of medical professionals introduced themselves and explained their roles in her surgery. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Jennifer Park, was surprisingly young and had a calming presence that immediately put Arya at ease. "I understand you're nervous about being unconscious for so long," Dr. Park said, reviewing Arya's chart. I want you to know that I'll be monitoring every aspect of your vital signs throughout the entire procedure. You'll have continuous brain monitoring, heart monitoring, and I'll be adjusting your anesthesia constantly based on what Dr. Rodriguez needs. Will I dream? Most patients don't remember dreaming during surgical anesthesia. It's more like a very deep sleep that you wake up from feeling like no time has passed at all. The surgical nurse, Maria Santos, walked them through the timeline. The surgery is scheduled to begin at 8 a.m. Dr. Rodriguez expects it to take 4 to 6 hours, depending on how the tumor separates from the surrounding tissue. Your family will receive updates every 2 hours. Aria's parents had been allowed to stay with her until it was time to go to the operating room. Her mother held her hand, occasionally squeezing it when the medical explanations became particularly technical. Her father continued taking notes, as if documenting everything would somehow give them more control over the outcome.
At 7:45 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez appeared in his surgical scrubs, looking focused but confident. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Arya admitted, "but ready." That's a completely normal response. "I want to review one more time what we're doing today. We're going to remove the entire tumor while preserving all the healthy brain tissue around it. Based on the imaging, I'm confident we can achieve complete resection. What if you can't get it all? If I encounter any areas where the tumor is too adherent to critical structures, I'll leave small portions rather than risk damage to your brain function, but I don't anticipate that being necessary in your case." The surgical team began wheeling her bed toward the operating room. The hallway seemed endless, with fluorescent lights creating a rhythmic pattern on the ceiling as they moved. Her parents walked alongside the gurney until they reached the operating room doors. "We'll be right here when you wake up," her mother said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I love you guys." "We love you too. See you on the other side." The operating room was larger and more high-tech than Arya had imagined. Multiple monitors displayed her MRI images, and sophisticated equipment lined the walls. The surgical table was positioned under massive overhead lights that could be adjusted to illuminate exactly where Dr. Rodriguez would be working. "We're going to give you some medication to help you relax now," Dr. Park said, adjusting something on the IV line. "Count backwards from 10 for me. 10, 9, 8, 7. Darkness. In the waiting area, Robert and Linda Harris began the longest day of their lives. The family surgical waiting room was filled with other families going through their own medical crises, some chatting nervously, others sitting in stunned silence, a few trying to work on laptops as if normal life could continue. At 10 a.m., a surgical nurse came out with the first update. "Dr. Rodriguez wanted you to know that they've successfully accessed the tumor site and everything is proceeding as planned. Arya is stable and responding well to anesthesia." At noon, the second update arrived. "They're about halfway through the tumor removal process. Dr. Rodriguez is pleased with how cleanly the tumor is separating from the brain tissue, still looking good." By 2 p.m., Linda Harris was pacing the waiting room while her husband tried to distract himself by researching post-operative recovery timelines on his phone. "This is taking longer than he said it would," Linda whispered. "He said 4 to 6 hours. It's only been 6 hours." "Only 6 hours? Our daughter has been unconscious with her skull open for 6 hours." At 2:30 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez himself appeared in the waiting room, still in surgical scrubs, but with his surgical cap removed. The expression on his face was one that every parent in a surgical waiting room learns to read instantly. Success. "The surgery went extremely well," he said, sitting down across from them. "We achieved complete tumor removal. The entire mass came out cleanly, with excellent margins between the tumor and healthy brain tissue." Linda Harris began crying with relief while her husband gripped the arm of his chair. "How is she? Is she okay?" "She's stable and waking up in recovery now. Her initial neurological responses are excellent. She's following commands, speaking clearly, and showing no signs of deficits." "Can we see her?" "In about an hour, once she's more alert. I want to warn you that she'll have some swelling around the surgical site, and she'll be tired and disoriented for the next day or two. That's completely normal." "When will we know if there are any long-term effects?"
We'll do a comprehensive neurological assessment tomorrow, but her immediate postoperative responses are very encouraging. I'm optimistic that her symptoms should begin resolving within the next few weeks. Recovery was nothing like Arya had expected. She woke up feeling like her head was wrapped in cotton, with a dull ache where the sharp pains used to be. The room came into focus slowly, revealing machines beeping steadily and her parents' faces hovering nearby. "How do you feel?" her mother asked softly. Arya tried to form words, surprised at how much effort it required. "Different," she finally managed. "The headache is softer." Even through the post-surgical haze and medication, she could tell something fundamental had changed. The constant pressure behind her left eye was gone. The floating sensation that had plagued her for months was absent. "Dr. Rodriguez said the surgery went perfectly," her father said. "He got the whole thing." Over the next few hours, as the anesthesia continued wearing off, Arya became more aware of the absence of her familiar symptoms. She could turn her head without triggering vertigo. The overhead lights didn't send shooting pains through her skull. When a nurse asked her to follow a pen light with her eyes, her vision remained clear and focused. "This is remarkable," said Dr. Ashley Freeman, the neurologist who came to assess her that evening. "Your visual tracking is normal, your balance responses are appropriate, and your cognitive function appears intact." "I feel like myself again," Arya said, surprising herself with the clarity of the thought. "That's exactly what we want to hear. The brain swelling from surgery will take several days to resolve completely, but your underlying neurological function looks excellent." The next morning brought the pathology results. Dr. Rodriguez delivered them personally, which Arya had learned was usually a good sign. "Confirmed meningioma, completely benign. We achieve what we call a Simpson grade 1 resection, which means we removed the tumor and the small portion of surrounding membrane where it was attached. The chance of recurrence is less than 5%. So it's really over? Barring any complications, yes. You'll need MRI follow-ups at 6 months, 1 year, and then annually for several years, but I expect those to show no evidence of tumor regrowth." That afternoon, Jake Sullivan and 2 other colleagues from Morrison & Associates stopped by with flowers and get-well cards from the entire marketing team. "You look amazing," Jake said, though Arya was sure she looked terrible with her head partially shaved and a line of surgical staples across her scalp. "I feel amazing," she said, and meant it. "For the first time in almost a year, I don't have a headache." "When do you think you'll be ready to come back?"
Dr. Rodriguez says probably 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how I heal, but I'm already thinking more clearly than I have in months. That evening, alone for the first time since the surgery, Arya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this hospital bed. 6 months of being dismissed, minimized, and medicated for conditions she didn't have. Months of self-doubt and frustration, of wondering if she was imagining her symptoms or being overly dramatic. But she'd been right. Every instinct, every persistent appointment request, every refusal to accept stress as an explanation for debilitating neurological symptoms had been justified. The tumor was gone, but the lesson remained. Sometimes patients know their bodies better than anyone else, and advocacy, even when it's uncomfortable or dismissed, can literally be a matter of life and death. 3 days post-surgery, as she prepared to go home, Arya made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. She was going to write about her experience, not just for herself, but for every other patient who had been told their serious symptoms were all in their head. The medical system had failed her repeatedly, but she had not failed herself. That distinction, she realized, would make all the difference in how she approached not just her recovery, but the rest of her life. 2 weeks after surgery, Arya Harris sat in her apartment staring at a blank document on her laptop screen. The cursor blinked in the white space, waiting for her to find the words to describe an experience that had fundamentally changed how she viewed medicine, advocacy, and her own strength. Her recovery had been remarkably smooth. The surgical staples were removed after 10 days, leaving a thin line hidden beneath her hair that would eventually fade to barely visible. The headaches that had defined her existence for 8 months were completely gone. Her vision was crystal clear, her balance perfect, her energy levels higher than they'd been since the symptoms began.
But the psychological healing was more complex. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, she told Dr. Chang during a follow-up neuropsychological evaluation. Like, maybe I'm just in some kind of honeymoon period, and the symptoms will come back. That's a normal response after what you've been through, Dr. Chang assured her. You spent months having your reality questioned by medical professionals. It's going to take time to trust that you're actually better. The cognitive tests showed dramatic improvement. Her memory, which had become foggy and unreliable during the worst of her symptoms, was now testing above average. The word-finding difficulties that had frustrated her for months were completely resolved. Your brain is healing beautifully, Dr. Chang said, reviewing the results. The compression damage appears to have been completely reversible. But Aria's relationship with the medical system remained complicated. She'd scheduled her 6-month follow-up MRI, but the thought of walking back into a doctor's office triggered anxiety she hadn't expected. What if they find something else? What if they dismiss other symptoms in the future? She asked Dr. Rodriguez during her 3-week post-operative appointment. I understand your concern, he said, examining the healing surgical site, but you've learned something valuable through this experience. You know your body, and you know when something isn't right. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The validation from Dr. Rodriguez meant everything, but it also highlighted the stark contrast between his approach and the dismissive treatment she'd received from other physicians. 3 weeks into her medical leave, Aria began writing. What started as a personal journal entry about her experience grew into something larger, a detailed account of medical gaslighting and the importance of patient advocacy. She wrote about the months of being told her symptoms were stress-related, about the emergency room visit where she was treated as an anxious young woman rather than someone experiencing neurological symptoms, about the specialists who focused on her age and gender rather than her documented symptoms. But she also wrote about persistence, about trusting her instincts even when medical professionals didn't, and about the importance of continuing to seek answers when something feels fundamentally wrong with your body. The first person she shared the draft with was her mother. This is powerful, Linda Harris said after reading it, but are you sure you want to put this out there? Some of those doctors might not appreciate being called out. I'm not naming anyone specifically, but other people need to know that this happens, especially young women. We're dismissed more often than other demographics, and sometimes that dismissal can be life-threatening. Her father had a different concern. What about your career? Will this affect your professional reputation? Dad, I almost had permanent brain damage because doctors wouldn't take me seriously. My career seems less important than potentially helping other people avoid the same experience. Jake Sullivan had a surprising reaction when she showed him the piece during her first week back at work. You should publish this, he said immediately. Do you know how many people go through similar experiences? My sister-in-law had endometriosis for years before anyone would listen to her about her pain levels. I was thinking about starting a blog, maybe posting it online. Think bigger. This could be an op-ed in a major publication. This is exactly the kind of healthcare advocacy that needs more visibility. The idea terrified and energized her simultaneously. Making her story public would mean reliving the frustration and fear publicly, but it might also prevent others from going through the same dismissive treatment. Her 6-month follow-up MRI was scheduled for March, exactly 1 year after her symptoms had begun. The night before, she couldn't sleep, despite knowing rationally that the chances of tumor recurrence were minimal. I'm being ridiculous, she said in her reflection in the bathroom mirror at 3 a.m. The surgery was successful. Dr. Rodriguez said the pathology was perfect. There's no medical reason to worry. But the anxiety wasn't entirely medical. She was about to re-enter the healthcare system that had failed her so dramatically, even though this time she was seeing doctors who had proven they would listen to her. The MRI itself was routine, but sitting in the waiting area afterward, watching other patients with worried expressions, brought back vivid memories of her own journey through this system. Aria Harris, Dr. Rodriguez's nurse, called her back for results that same day, a scheduling courtesy that would have seemed impossible during her diagnostic odyssey. Perfect, Dr. Rodriguez announced, pulling up the MRI images. No evidence of tumor recurrence, no unusual brain swelling, no concerning changes. This is exactly what we want to see. The relief was overwhelming, but something else was too, a sense of completion that she hadn't expected. Can I ask you something? She said as Dr. Rodriguez prepared to leave. How often do you see patients who've been dismissed by other doctors the way I was?
He paused, considering his answer carefully. More often than you might think, especially with young women presenting neurological symptoms. Brain tumors in people under 30 are rare enough that they're not always considered, and symptoms can be attributed to stress or anxiety. Is there anything that could be done differently? Systemically, I mean? Better training and recognizing when symptoms don't fit common patterns. More emphasis on listening to patients rather than making assumptions based on demographics. But honestly, the biggest change would be if more patients felt empowered to advocate for themselves the way you did. That conversation solidified Arya's decision to publish her story. If medical professionals acknowledged that the problem existed, then patient advocacy and awareness became even more critical. The op-ed was published 6 months later in a major healthcare publication under the title, "I had a brain tumor, but doctors said I was fine. Why we need to listen to patients." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Her inbox filled with messages from people sharing similar experiences. Women with endometriosis dismissed as having difficult periods, patients with autoimmune conditions told their symptoms were psychological, people with rare diseases who fought for years to get proper diagnoses. But there were also messages from medical professionals acknowledging the problem and committing to better listening practices. Dr. Kellerman, her original primary care physician, sent a private message. "I read your article and wanted to apologize. Your case has made me reconsider how I approach patients presenting with persistent symptoms. Thank you for sharing your experience." The acknowledgement meant more than Arya had expected. It wasn't just about her individual experience anymore. It was about systemic change in how medical professionals approached patient concerns. 1 year after her surgery, Arya was invited to speak at a medical conference about patient advocacy and the importance of persistent symptom evaluation. Standing at a podium in front of doctors and medical students, she thought about the version of herself who had sat in Dr. Kellerman's office, unsure whether her symptoms were real or imagined. "The most important lesson I learned," she told the audience, "is that patients often know their bodies better than anyone else. When someone tells you something is wrong, especially when they're persistent about it, listen. Really listen. Because sometimes what looks like anxiety or stress or hypochondria is actually a brain tumor growing silently, waiting for someone to take it seriously." After the presentation, a young medical student approached her. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Your story changed how I plan to practice medicine." That evening, back in her apartment in Columbus, Arya updated her symptom journal for the final time. Instead of documenting headaches and dizzy spells, she wrote, "1 year post-surgery, clear MRI, no symptoms, full recovery, mission accomplished." But the real accomplishment wasn't just her physical healing, it was what her story had become, a testament to the power of self-advocacy, the importance of persistence when something feels wrong, and the potential for individual experiences to create broader change. The brain tumor was gone, but its impact continued in the lives of other patients who read her story and found the courage to keep seeking answers. In the end, that may have been the most important surgery of all, cutting through the silence that kept other patients from advocating for themselves. 2 years after her surgery, Arya Harris received a phone call that would reshape her understanding of her own story's impact. The caller was Dr. Amanda Foster, a resident at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, and her voice carried a mixture of professionalism and barely contained emotion. "Miss Harris, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I got your contact information from the conference organizers where you spoke last year. I wanted to tell you about a patient case that your story directly influenced." Arya set down her coffee and gave the call her full attention. Since publishing her op-ed and speaking at medical conferences, she'd received numerous messages from healthcare providers, but something in Dr. Foster's tone suggested this was different. 3 weeks ago, a 26-year-old woman named Jessica Martinez came to our emergency department with symptoms almost identical to what you described: persistent headaches, balance issues, vision problems. She'd been seen by multiple doctors over several months and told it was stress-related.
The familiar pattern made Arya's chest tighten, but she remained silent, letting Dr. Foster continue. Here's the thing. I heard you speak at the residence symposium 6 months ago, and your case was fresh in my mind. When Jessica described being dismissed repeatedly, I remembered your presentation about the importance of imaging when neurological symptoms persist despite normal initial workups. What did you find? A 2.8 centimeter acoustic neuroma pressing on her brainstem. We caught it before it caused permanent hearing loss or facial paralysis. She's scheduled for surgery next week with an excellent prognosis. Arya felt tears welling up. This wasn't just validation of her advocacy work. It was proof that sharing her story had potentially saved someone's quality of life, possibly their life entirely. Jessica wanted me to call you personally, Dr. Foster continued. She said reading your article online gave her the courage to keep pushing for answers when she felt like giving up. After the call ended, Arya sat in her apartment, overwhelmed by the realization that her worst medical experience had become someone else's lifeline. But Dr. Foster's call also sparked an idea that had been building in her mind for months. The individual success stories were meaningful, but Arya had begun to see patterns in the messages she received. Young women with autoimmune conditions, patients with rare diseases, people whose symptoms didn't fit neat diagnostic categories, all sharing similar experiences of medical dismissal and delayed diagnoses. She started researching patient advocacy organizations and discovered a significant gap. While there were groups focused on specific conditions, there wasn't a comprehensive resource dedicated to teaching patients how to navigate medical dismissal and advocate effectively for themselves. I want to start a nonprofit, she told her parents during their weekly video call. Her father, ever practical, immediately shifted into planning mode. What would it do exactly? Education and advocacy, teaching patients how to document symptoms, how to communicate with healthcare providers, how to seek second opinions when they're not being heard, but also working with medical schools to improve training around patient communication and bias recognition. Her mother looked concerned. That sounds like a full-time commitment. What about your career at Morrison & Associates? The question had been weighing on Arya's mind for weeks. She'd been promoted twice since returning from her medical leave, and her work on healthcare marketing campaigns had taken on new depth and authenticity following her personal experience. But increasingly, she found herself more energized by advocacy work than advertising campaigns. I've been thinking about that. I could transition to consulting work, maybe focus specifically on healthcare communications. It would give me more flexibility to build the nonprofit. The conversation with her boss, Susan Chen, was surprisingly supportive.
Your healthcare advocacy work has actually made you better at your job, Susan said during their meeting. The campaigns you've developed since your surgery have had more emotional authenticity than anything our team has produced. If you want to freelance and pursue the nonprofit, we'd love to keep you on as a consultant for healthcare accounts. The transition took 6 months to plan properly. Arya spent evenings and weekends developing a comprehensive website resource she called Your Voice Matters, a platform dedicated to patient advocacy education. The site included guides on symptom documentation, template letters for requesting second opinions, information about patient rights, and a database of questions to ask healthcare providers. But the most powerful feature was a story collection, a space where patients could share their experiences of medical dismissal and eventual diagnosis. The stories poured in from around the country, creating a powerful archive that demonstrated how common these experiences were. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an emergency medicine physician in Seattle, reached out after discovering the website. "I've been sharing your resources with medical students during their ER rotations," she wrote. "The story collection is particularly effective at helping them understand the patient perspective when they're feeling dismissed or not heard." The nonprofit officially launched on the 2-year anniversary of Arya's surgery. The timing felt symbolic, marking not just her personal recovery, but the transformation of her trauma into a tool for systemic change. The launch event was held at Ohio State's medical school, with Dr. Rodriguez serving as the keynote speaker. His presence lent medical credibility to the mission, while acknowledging the gaps in healthcare communication that had nearly cost Arya her health. Patient advocacy isn't opposition to medical care, Dr. Rodriguez told the audience of medical professionals, patients, and advocates. It's a partnership. When patients feel empowered to communicate effectively and healthcare providers feel equipped to listen actively, everyone benefits. 3 months after the launch, Aria received an unexpected invitation. The American Medical Association wanted her to participate in a panel discussion about patient-provider communication at their annual conference. The AMA, the same organization that represented many of the doctors who had dismissed her symptoms. "Are you sure you want to do this?" her mother asked when Aria shared the invitation. "It seems like walking into the lion's den." Maybe, but it's also a chance to reach thousands of healthcare providers with this message. The AMA wouldn't have invited me if they weren't ready to have this conversation. The panel was held in a massive auditorium filled with physicians from across the country. Aria found herself seated between a hospital administrator and a primary care physician, discussing improving patient satisfaction through enhanced communication. When the moderator asked her to share her perspective, Aria looked out at the sea of medical professionals and chose her words carefully. "I'm not here to blame individual doctors," she began. "The physicians who dismissed my symptoms weren't malicious. They were working within a system that doesn't always prioritize listening to patients, especially young women presenting with symptoms that don't fit obvious patterns." She could sense the audience's attention sharpening. But here's what I want you to understand. When a patient keeps coming back with the same concerns, when they're documenting symptoms and seeking multiple opinions, they're not being difficult or hypochondriacal. They're often trying to save their own lives. The response was mixed, but predominantly positive. Several physicians approached her afterward with their own stories, times when they'd initially dismissed symptoms that later proved serious, and how those experiences had changed their approach to patient care. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a primary care physician from Denver, shared a particularly striking story. "5 years ago, I had a patient similar to you. Young woman, persistent headaches, normal initial workup. I kept treating her for tension headaches until she finally demanded an MRI. Turned out to be a brain aneurysm that was successfully treated before it ruptured. Your story reminded me why I changed my practice patterns after that case." 6 months later, Your Voice Matters had grown beyond Aria's wildest expectations. The website was receiving over 50,000 unique visitors per month, and the story collection included over 800 patient experiences. Medical schools in 12 states were using their educational materials, and patient advocacy groups were partnering with them to improve healthcare communication. But the most meaningful feedback continued to come from individual patients who had used the resources to advocate for themselves. Sarah Chen from Portland wrote, "I used your symptom documentation template and communication guide when my doctor kept dismissing my joint pain as normal aging. I'm 34, and it turned out to be rheumatoid arthritis. Early treatment has prevented permanent joint damage." Marcus Johnson from Atlanta shared, "Your resources helped me advocate for my teenage daughter when multiple doctors said her fatigue and brain fog were just teenage hormones. She was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease and is thriving on treatment now." Each success story reinforced Aria's conviction that her own medical trauma had been transformed into something larger and more meaningful than she could have imagined while lying in that hospital bed 2 years earlier. The work was demanding and emotionally challenging, reading hundreds of stories of medical dismissal, helping patients navigate complex healthcare systems, and constantly reliving aspects of her own experience through others' accounts. But on quiet evenings in her apartment, when she updated the nonprofit's impact metrics and read the latest batch of success stories, Aria felt a deep sense of purpose that her marketing career had never provided. Her brain tumor had been removed, but its impact continued to ripple outward through every patient who found their voice, every healthcare provider who learned to listen more carefully, and every medical student who graduated with a deeper understanding of the importance of patient advocacy. The scar hidden beneath her hair had faded to barely visible, but the strength she discovered while fighting for her own healthcare had grown into something that could benefit thousands of others facing similar battles. 5 years after her surgery, Aria Harris stood in the lobby of the newly opened Patient Advocacy Center at Ohio State University Medical Center, reading the bronze plaque that bore her name. The inscription read,
The Aria Harris Center for Patient Advocacy, dedicated to ensuring every voice is heard in healthcare. The center represented something she never could have imagined during those dark months of medical dismissal: a permanent, institutionalized commitment to patient advocacy, integrated directly into medical education and clinical practice. "I still can't believe this is real," she murmured to Dr. Rodriguez, who had played a crucial role in securing funding for the center through his connections with the university's board of directors. "You earned this," he replied. "What started as your individual fight for answers has become a model for healthcare institutions across the country." The opening ceremony was attended by medical students, faculty, patients, and advocacy organizations from around the region. But for Aria, the most meaningful presence was Dr. Patricia Kellerman, her original primary care physician who had dismissed her symptoms as stress. Dr. Kellerman had requested a private meeting before the ceremony, and they sat in Aria's new office overlooking the medical center campus. "I've wanted to have this conversation in person for years," Dr. Kellerman began, her usual professional composure tinged with vulnerability. "Your case fundamentally changed how I practice medicine. I've implemented new protocols in my clinic for patients with persistent symptoms, and I've become an advocate for patient advocacy training in our residency program."
The apology Arya had once desperately wanted to hear now felt less important than the systemic changes Dr. Kellerman described. "What matters most is that other patients won't go through what I did," Arya responded. "Your willingness to examine your own practices and change them, that takes courage, and it's exactly what healthcare needs." The conversation marked a full circle moment that Arya recognized as significant. The doctor who had initially failed her had become an ally in preventing similar failures for future patients. During the center's opening presentation, Arya shared statistics that demonstrated the scope of the problem they were addressing. A recent study conducted in partnership with the center had surveyed 5,000 patients across 10 states, revealing that 67% of respondents had experienced medical dismissal at least once, with young women being dismissed at nearly twice the rate of other demographics. But more importantly, institutions that had implemented patient advocacy training using curricula developed by Your Voice Matters showed a 34% reduction in diagnostic delays and a 28% improvement in patient satisfaction scores. "These aren't just numbers," Arya told the audience. "Each percentage point represents real people whose lives were improved because healthcare providers learned to listen more effectively." Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Seattle emergency physician who had been using Arya's resources with medical students, had flown in for the ceremony. "5 years ago, Arya's story was an individual tragedy that became an individual triumph," she said during the panel discussion. "Today, it's become a blueprint for systemic healthcare improvement that's being replicated nationally." The center's programs were already expanding beyond what Arya had initially envisioned. Medical students could complete rotations in patient advocacy, learning to recognize and address communication barriers. The center also housed a rapid consultation service where patients experiencing medical dismissal could receive same-day advocacy support and guidance on next steps. But perhaps most significantly, the center had established partnerships with insurance companies to develop new protocols for coverage of diagnostic testing when patients met specific advocacy criteria: persistent symptoms documented over time, multiple provider consultations without resolution, and standardized advocacy assessments. These insurance partnerships had emerged from a case that particularly resonated with Arya. Maria Rodriguez, a 32-year-old teacher from Phoenix, had been experiencing severe abdominal pain for 8 months. Multiple emergency room visits had resulted in diagnoses of anxiety and stress-related digestive issues. Her insurance company had denied coverage for additional testing, citing the previous physician's assessments. Using the center's rapid consultation service, Maria received advocacy support that helped her document her symptoms according to clinical standards and communicate more effectively with her providers. When insurance coverage was still denied, the center's legal advocacy team helped her appeal the decision using their new protocols.
The eventual diagnosis was ovarian cancer, caught at stage 2 instead of the stage 4 it might have reached without intervention. Maria was now cancer-free and working as a volunteer advocate for the center. This is what we mean by systemic change, Arya explained to a group of healthcare policymakers visiting the center. Individual patient advocacy stories like mine are powerful, but lasting impact comes from changing the systems that create these problems in the first place. The policy visit was part of a larger initiative. Senator Elizabeth Warren's office had contacted Arya about testifying before a Senate subcommittee on healthcare regarding proposed legislation that would require patient advocacy training as part of medical school accreditation. The prospect of congressional testimony both thrilled and terrified Arya. It represented the highest level of platform she'd ever had to advocate for systemic change, but it also meant exposing her personal story to national political scrutiny. "Are you ready for this level of public attention?" her mother asked during one of their weekly calls. "Once you testify before Congress, this becomes even more public than it already is." "Mom, I've been telling this story for 5 years now. If sharing it one more time can help create federal requirements for patient advocacy training, then it's worth whatever scrutiny comes with it." The Senate testimony took place on a Tuesday morning in October. Arya found herself seated at a witness table facing senators from both parties, cameras recording every word for C-SPAN and news coverage. Senator Warren introduced her by reading statistics about diagnostic delays and medical dismissal, then invited Arya to share her story and recommendations. "Senators, my name is Arya Harris, and 5 years ago, I nearly suffered permanent brain damage because multiple healthcare providers dismissed my neurological symptoms as stress and anxiety for 8 months. The familiar opening felt different in this setting, not just personal narrative, but evidence in support of federal policy changes." She testified for 30 minutes, weaving together her personal experience with the data from thousands of patient stories collected through the center, and concluding with specific policy recommendations: mandatory patient advocacy training and medical education, standardized protocols for persistent symptom evaluation, and insurance coverage requirements for diagnostic testing when patients meet advocacy criteria. These insurance partnerships had emerged from a case that particularly resonated with Arya. Maria Rodriguez, a 32-year-old teacher from Phoenix, had been experiencing severe abdominal pain for 8 months. Multiple emergency room visits had resulted in diagnoses of anxiety and stress-related digestive issues. Her insurance company had denied coverage for additional testing, citing the previous physician's assessments. Using the center's rapid consultation service, Maria received advocacy support that helped her document her symptoms according to clinical standards and communicate more effectively with her providers. When insurance coverage was still denied, the center's legal advocacy team helped her appeal the decision using their new protocols. The eventual diagnosis was ovarian cancer, caught at stage 2 instead of the stage 4 it might have reached without intervention. Maria was now cancer-free and working as a volunteer advocate for the center. "This is what we mean by systemic change," Arya explained to a group of healthcare policymakers visiting the center. "Individual patient advocacy stories like mine are powerful, but lasting impact comes from changing the systems that create these problems in the first place." The policy visit was part of a larger initiative. Senator Elizabeth Warren's office had contacted Arya about testifying before a Senate subcommittee on healthcare regarding proposed legislation that would require patient advocacy training as part of medical school accreditation. The prospect of congressional testimony both thrilled and terrified Arya. It represented the highest level of platform she'd ever had to advocate for systemic change, but it also meant exposing her personal story to national political scrutiny. "Are you ready for this level of public attention?" her mother asked during one of their weekly calls. "Once you testify before Congress, this becomes even more public than it already is." "Mom, I've been telling this story for 5 years now. If sharing it one more time can help create federal requirements for patient advocacy training, then it's worth whatever scrutiny comes with it." The Senate testimony took place on a Tuesday morning in October. Arya found herself seated at a witness table facing senators from both parties, cameras recording every word for C-SPAN and news coverage. Senator Warren introduced her by reading statistics about diagnostic delays and medical dismissal, then invited Arya to share her story and recommendations. Senators, my name is Arya Harris, and 5 years ago, I nearly suffered permanent brain damage because multiple healthcare providers dismissed my neurological symptoms as stress and anxiety for 8 months. The familiar opening felt different in this setting, not just personal narrative, but evidence in support of federal policy changes. She testified for 30 minutes, weaving together her personal experience with the data from thousands of patient stories collected through the center, and concluding with specific policy recommendations: mandatory patient advocacy training and medical education, standardized protocols for persistent symptom evaluation, and insurance coverage requirements for diagnostic testing when patients meet advocacy criteria. The questions from senators were surprisingly bipartisan and substantive. Senator Susan Collins from Maine shared a constituent story remarkably similar to Arya, while Senator Ted Cruz asked detailed questions about implementation costs and medical school accreditation requirements. 3 months later, the Patient Advocacy and Healthcare Act was introduced with bipartisan support. While the legislative process would be lengthy, the fact that patient advocacy had reached the level of federal policy consideration represented a victory Arya couldn't have imagined when she first started documenting her symptoms in a journal app. But the most profound moment came 6 months after her congressional testimony, during a routine speaking engagement at a medical school in Boston. After her presentation, a first-year medical student approached her with tears in her eyes. "My name is Jessica Martinez," the student said. "You might not remember, but 2.5 years ago, Dr. Foster called you about my case. I was the patient with the acoustic neuroma who was inspired by your story to keep seeking answers." Arya stared at Jessica, struggling to process the full circle moment. The patient whose successful advocacy had been directly influenced by her story was now training to become a physician herself. "I'm in medical school because of what you taught me about being my own health advocate," Jessica continued. "But more than that, I'm here to make sure other patients never go through what we did. I want to be the kind of doctor who listens for the first time."
That evening, alone in her hotel room, Arya reflected on the journey from dismissed patient to congressional witness to inspiration for future physicians. Her brain tumor had been gone for 5 years, but its impact continued expanding in ways she never could have predicted. She opened her laptop and began writing in the same journal app where she'd once documented headaches and dizzy spells. This time, she wrote, "Today I met Jessica Martinez, a medical student. The ripple effects of sharing our stories keep expanding beyond what we can imagine. Every patient who finds their voice, every medical student who learns to listen, every policy change that makes healthcare more responsive, all of it traces back to individual people deciding their experiences matter enough to share. My tumor is gone, but the lesson remains. When something is wrong with your body, trust yourself. Keep asking questions, document everything, seek second opinions, and never, ever let anyone convince you that serious symptoms are all in your head. Sometimes being your own advocate literally saves your life, and sometimes it saves countless others too." As she closed the laptop, Arya realized that her story, which had begun with medical dismissal and personal trauma, had become something larger than herself. It had become proof that individual advocacy, when supported by systemic change, could transform not just personal healthcare experiences, but the entire culture of medical practice. The scar beneath her hair was now completely invisible, but the strength she'd discovered while fighting for her diagnosis continued growing, touching lives she'd never met and creating changes that would benefit patients for generations to come. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.